Hi, I'm Sarah Nodge. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at the Pincher Creek Library. We have a lovely audience here in Pincher Creek who have joined us in addition to libraries in Lethbridge, Hanna, Medicine Hat, Crow's Nest Pass, Cardston, Claresholm, Canmore, Redcliffe, Crossfield, Rockyford, Okotoks, and Turner Valley. I think that's probably the first time I got it right? Like ever. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Tonight we've got Andrea Morehouse, who is she's in the final leg of completing her Ph.D. Thesis on the bears in southwest Alberta.
Okay, thanks Sarah, and thanks everyone here and all these other libraries for coming out tonight. Nice to have a nice group of folks. So what I'm going to talk about is the work that we have been doing in southwestern Alberta for the last several years, monitoring the grizzly bear population. This work started in 2011, and it has very much been a partnership between a variety of different organizations. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm with the University of Alberta. I'm completing my PhD there, and this has also been a collaboration with Alberta Environment and Parks, Parks Canada, and then we've also collaborated a bit with some folks with the United States Geological Survey in Glacier National Park. Is it going to be up? I'm confused. Yeah. Sorry. No. It's throwing me off when I look up there and I see myself instead of the slides. Okay, so before I jump into some of the project specifics, I thought I'd start off with just a bit of an overview about grizzly bears and their management within the province. So historically, grizzly bears ranged much further than they do today, and that's the map that you see on the right up there. So the light shaded gray area is the historical distribution of grizzly bears. They historically went east almost all the way to the Mississippi, south into Mexico, west to California and the Pacific Ocean. Their range today is substantially contracted from that. That's the dark gray shaded area that you see on that map there. And that's primarily just due to increasing human populations and changing land use. The map on the left is the current distribution of grizzly bears in Alberta. This map is a bit out, a few years old at this point, and so we know that we're starting to see grizzly bears in other areas further east, but this gives you an approximate idea of where we have grizzly bears in the province. And from Calgary south, they're primarily in the Rocky Mountain type habitats, though like I say, certainly in the last few years, we're seeing them push further and further into the prairie and agricultural regions of the province. Now, historically, grizzly bears were first considered a fur bearer species in 1928. That changed the following year so that they're designated as a big game species. Grizzly bears were hunted all throughout this time period, and it wasn't until the 1960s that we started to see some more stringent regulations put on the hunting of grizzly bears. In 1988, that's when the draw system and quotas were established. And then in 2002, Alberta's Endangered Species Conservation Committee made a recommendation that grizzly bears be listed as a threatened species in Alberta. That recommendation was not accepted at that time, largely because it was felt that we didn't have enough information to warrant the listing of grizzly bears as threatened. And so a recovery team was appointed, and one of the things that they were tasked with was providing more up-to-date population information for grizzly bears in Alberta. And so that's what happened from 2004 through 2008. There was a series of DNA-based capture, mark, recapture population estimates that occurred throughout Alberta. And as a result of those studies, they estimated that there were about 700 grizzly bears in the areas that they surveyed. Within that same time period, in 2006, that's when we saw the moratorium put on the hunting of bears, and that of course is still in place today. In 2010, grizzly bears were then officially listed as a threatened species in Alberta, and that's their current listing, and that listing came about based largely on the results of that previous population estimate. Now, the original recovery plan for grizzly bears was from 2008 through 2013, and so that plan has since expired, and there's a new draft of this that is currently in review, and I've been told that it should be released shortly, hopefully within the next couple months, for public comments, and once that happens, it'll be posted on the Alberta Environment and Parks website for public comment. So hopefully we will see that in the near future. So some of the reasons why grizzly bears were listed as threatened in the first place, one was that they have low reproductive rates. So a grizzly bear will not breed for the first time until they're about 5 to 6 years old. And that's a little bit later than we see for other carnivores. And once they do start to breed, they'll have anywhere from 1 to 3 cubs. 2 is pretty common. And these cubs will stay with their mom for about 2 to 3 years. So there's a pretty high maternal investment in the offspring in this species. And so it takes a little bit longer than some other species for that population to start to increase. There was concern over human-caused mortality, which is why we saw that the hunt suspended in 2006. And there's also concern over increasing human use and increasing human activity and unrestricted road access, particularly in primary grizzly bear habitats. And there's been a number of studies that have looked at the relationship between road density and human use of roads and grizzly bear use of that area. And in general, as that human activity and that road density increases, grizzly bear use of that area tends to decrease. So those are some of the main reasons why they were listed as threatened originally. Of course, we know that grizzly bears face a lot of challenges in Alberta, but they can also create a number of challenges, particularly for communities that live within their home ranges. They can rip apart grain bins, get into silage, kill livestock, kill pets. They're also a human safety concern, especially as we start to see grizzly bears in areas where we haven't seen them in quite some time. There's definitely a public safety component to this as well. And so these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind and think about as we're thinking about grizzly bear management in Alberta. So we work in southwestern Alberta, where we all are right now, where the mountains meet the prairies. And so we have this very stark interface between forested mountainous public lands to the west and private agricultural lands to the east. This is a multi-use landscape. There's a lot of different human activities that occur. People come here for recreation. There's hiking, there's hunting, fishing, oil and gas activities present, forestry is present. On the private lands, the predominant land use is agriculture, including both livestock and crop production. And on top of all of this, we've got all of the large native carnivores present, and that, of course, includes grizzly bears. So for these next few slides, what I'm going to talk about is some work that we've done looking at the types of conflicts that we see with grizzly bears in this area. And so this is a little bit of a different study area than I'm going to talk about later when we talk about the population monitoring. So the area that I'm referring to in these next few slides is an area from just a little ways south of Calgary is the northern boundary. BC is the western boundary. Montana is the southern boundary. And then that eastern line it just follows the eastern extent of the wildlife management units in that area. And what we've done is we've gone through the last 16 years of occurrence records. So if somebody has a complaint about a grizzly bear or an issue with a grizzly bear, they'll phone the Fish and Wildlife officer. That officer will record the details of that event as a text summary in a database. And what we've done is gone through those last 16 years since 1999 to look at what are some of the patterns, what are we seeing in terms of the types of conflicts, the types of issues that folks are having with grizzly bears in this area. And so that's what is on this slide here. So the x-axis down the bottom is the year. So 1999 was the date that electronic database was created. So that's when we start. And we've gone through 2014. And then the frequency is just on the y-axis there. And so the total occurrences are that top line in the purple. So that's just everything that was phoned in, everything that was reported. And what we've done is we've broken this down to see what was actually happening in these different scenarios. So we've pulled out the sightings. That's the blue squares on this. And so this is a situation where somebody just reported that they saw a grizzly bear. There wasn't any sort of actual interaction. So those are the blue lines. The red is what I want you to pay particular attention to because that's what I'm going to talk about for the next couple of slides. So the red is what we're calling an incident. And this is a situation in which the grizzly bear obtained human food or killed or attempted to kill livestock or pets, caused property damage. So it's something where there's some sort of actual interaction between a human land use and that grizzly bear. The human conflict then, those are the green along the bottom. And this is a situation in which the grizzly bear, say, mauled or attacked a person, or vice versa, the person killed or wounded the grizzly bear. And so we've pulled those out as human conflicts. And so with the incidents, as you can see, they've increased for the last several years, particularly since 2006. And we looked at those incidents a little bit further then. And so we broke those down to see, well, what was actually happening within those incidents. And I've got the 4 large carnivore species on here. The grizzly bears are the ones that I've highlighted on the left. And about 55% of the incidents are related to attractants. And I'll go into that in the next slide there. But then about 40% are related to livestock. So this is where grizzly bear killed or injured livestock. And we see a similar pattern for the black bears, but the vast majority of the incidents for black bears are related to attractants. And this is very different than wolves and cougars. The main issues that we're seeing with wolves and cougars, perhaps not surprisingly because they're strictly carnivorous species, is that they're killing and injuring livestock. So the vast majority of incidents for those two are livestock related. But then coming back to the grizzly bears and looking at, well, what are the types of attractants that we see? The vast majority of these are related to either grain or boneyards or dead stock. And so for those of you that were here last week and you had a chance to hear Jeff Bechtel talk, he mentioned some of these issues and some of the work that's being done in the area to try and mitigate some of these conflicts. For example, he talked about bear-proof grain bin doors, cement floors, hopper bottom bins, those sorts of things to try and reduce the ability of the grizzly bear to access those attractants. And of course, then the dead stock or the boneyards, this is another issue that Jeff talked about, and there's a lot of work that's been going on to reduce the availability of that for grizzly bears. The Waterton Biosphere Reserve has a dead stock removal program, and they're really promoting and trying to get that dead stock off the landscape because this is a major attractant for grizzly bears, bringing them into closer proximity with people. So those are some of the big issues that we see in terms of attractant type. The other thing we did is we wanted to see, well, where are these occurrences happening? And so what this graph is showing you, again, years on the x-axis there. And what we've done is we've taken the average distance from the public land. So the public land is the western part of our study area. And we've seen how far away from the public land or the mountainous land these occurrences are over time. And so over the last 16 years, we've seen an increase in the distance from public land, meaning that these occurrences are moving further and further east onto the prairie and agricultural type habitats. And this top picture sort of illustrates that we're starting to see grizzly bears in areas that we haven't seen them in quite some time. This top picture was taken out near the Del Bonita area. And that bottom one is from the Cardston area. So over time, we've definitely seen this eastern expansion of some of these occurrences. And one potential reason for that is maybe we've just got more bears. The bear population is increasing and we're starting to see them in other areas. And so then that brings me to sort of the second part that I want to talk about is this Southwestern Alberta Grizzly Bear Monitoring Project. And our overall objective with this program was to provide updated abundance and density information for southwestern Alberta. So our study area for this is a little bit different. We're a smaller scale than the area that I was talking about previously. Alberta is divided into 7 different bear management areas or BMAs, and we're in that very southwestern corner. Let's see, will the mouse work? No, you can't see that. Okay. So the very southwestern corner, that blue sort of shaded area is where we are. The northern boundary of our study area is Highway 3 through the Crow's Nest Pass. BC is our western boundary. Montana is our southern boundary. And then the eastern boundary it's meant to encompass the majority of the eastern extent of grizzly bear range. We know that there's bears that are occurring outside of this, but the majority of grizzly bear range is within here, within that area. And the eastern boundary follows the existing wildlife management unit in that area. So that's why it's got sort of that funny shape, is because it's following along a river. That's the current boundary for some of the wildlife management units. And the bounds of this particular BMA have changed slightly under the new recovery plan. It's very similar to the old one, but there's some slight changes. And so that's why that boundary might also look a little bit different than perhaps what you've seen in the past. A few things about this particular BMA that I think are worth mentioning. The first is that there's a lot of private land down here, and this is very different than other BMAs within Alberta. About 60% of the land within this BMA is privately owned. And the remaining 40% then is between Waterton Lakes National Park and the Forest Reserve or Crown Land. And then we've got Alberta Parks, Beauvais Lakes is that sort of little shaded green area you can see out in the middle there. Now, in the new recovery plan, there's two different zones. So there's what's called recovery zone, and this is the area that's within that green line on the map. And within this area, this is the area in which the province explicitly intends to recover the grizzly bear population. Within the and it's predominantly public land. And then the other area, the hashed area, is the support zone, and this is designed or intended to allow for grizzly bears whose home ranges are not entirely encompassed within that recovery zone. In this region of Alberta, the support zone is exclusively private land. And again, that's very different than other areas. Some other areas of the province, the support zone is predominantly public land. We just don't have that much public land down here. The area of the public land within this region is only about 1,800 square kilometers. So that's much smaller than some of these bigger parks up in the Banff and Jasper and northern Alberta, where there's quite a vast amount of public land. So that's something that makes this area a little bit different and unique, and something that we need to keep in mind. The other thing to mention is that the last time this area was surveyed was done in 2007, and that was part of that larger provincial effort that occurred from 2004 through 2008. The estimate at that time was about 51 grizzly bears. And the last thing I want to mention on this slide is that grizzly bears here are part of a much larger international population that includes BC and Montana. And that's an important point to keep in mind, and one that I'm going to come back to a little bit later. We know through previous genetic work that grizzly bears in southern Alberta are the same bears that are in southeast BC and Montana. They're all interbreeding. They're moving across those boundaries, and there is a large biological population of grizzly bears. Can I turn this down? There we go. Okay, so we wanted to get a better, more up-to-date estimate of the grizzly bears using the area, and so to do that, we used non-invasive genetic sampling. Specifically, we used rub trees. And so bear will rub on a tree, just like you see this guy in this video doing here. We primarily think that most people think it's a form of communication. We don't know exactly what they're communicating, but that's the best hypothesis is that it is related to communication. They typically rub on just one side of the tree, and so as a result of that rubbing, that tree develops certain characteristics. The side that's being rubbed on tends to be smoother than the back side. It tends to be discolored. Sometimes there's bite marks, sometimes there's claw marks. When we find these for the first time, sometimes they're just covered in a mat of grizzly bear hair. One of the other characteristics that I think is kind of cool is what you see in that picture on the right there. So bears, as they approach these trees, as if it's a particularly well-used tree, they'll step in the same spot over and over, and you'll get a lot of different bears using that. And so it results in essentially a bear trail. Those are the bear footsteps going up to that tree. So yeah, we're using rub trees as our tool to monitor the bear population. And a few examples of this. So I sort of use this term rub tree, rub object a bit interchangeably, because they don't just rub on trees. They'll rub on power poles, fence posts, signs. You name it, they might rub on it. So we've got a fair bit of variety in the type of rub objects that we see. So why did we decide to use rub trees? Well, they're non-invasive. So as I've said, there's no lure, there's no bait, there's no attractants. We're simply taking advantage of a natural bear behavior. So it's safe for bears, it's safe for the personnel doing the work. It can be efficient, so bears will travel along trails. They'll use those opportunistically as easy travel paths, and we can do the same thing when we're surveying for these, which makes it more efficient when we have to go back to collect the hair samples if we can travel along a trail network. There's some flexibility in the design here, which is nice. So I've been talking about these rub objects, but the other thing that we have a lot of in southwest Alberta is barbed wire. And so, for example, we might have a stretch of fence that goes through a Saskatoon patch, and the bear is traveling along that or through that, and we can mark that stretch of fence as a sampling location as well. So there's a little bit of flexibility, which has been nice. One of the biggest reasons we went this route is that they've had success with this in Montana. So as I mentioned, we collaborated a bit with the USGS in Glacier National Park, and Kate Kendall was the research ecologist there for a number of years. She just retired a couple of years ago. But her and her team used rub trees to monitor their grizzly bear populations for a number of years, and they've published on this. And so this was a peer-reviewed, published methodology from Montana, and so it made sense to extend that up here into southwestern Alberta. So this slide gives you a nice profile of what this actually looks like in the field then. If you've been out hiking in the area at some point over the last several years, chances are you have run into one or more of these. This picture comes from a remote trail camera in Waterton Lakes National Park. This is a black bear, so both black bears and grizzly bears will rub. And I like this picture because, like I say, it gives you a nice idea of what these actually look like. So each tree has about 4 strands of barbed wire that are attached to it. Each strand is about a foot in length, and we attach that with fencing staples. And then at the base of each tree, on the side opposite of where the bear is rubbing, there's a little aluminum number tag, and that has a unique number on it. And that unique number allows us to link any hair samples that we take off that tree back to that particular location. The little pink square that you see there's one of those on either side of the tree, and that's just so you can see it while we're hiking down the trail. And then once we identify these rub objects and we get them set up for the first time, we'll burn all of the existing hair samples off of that tree. And the reason that we do that is so that when we go back, we know what time period any new hair samples came from. So this is our study area again in a little bit more detail. So each dot on here represents one of our sampling stations. And so we have 899 of these that were set up. The color corresponds to the year in which that rub object was identified. So 2011 and 2012, which are the gray and the yellow dots, were primarily setup years for us. We did do a little bit of hair collection those years, but the big push for the hair collection came in 2013 and 2014. As you see from the blue and the red, we did also set up a few additional rub objects those years, but our main focus was collecting the hair samples. And so we have 2 full years of sampling, 2013 and 2014. The other thing that I want to mention on here is the tremendous amount of community support that we have had for this project. There's been over 70 landowners that have participated, 4 different grazing co-ops, and quite frankly, there's no way we could have done this without that kind of help. It really allowed us, to get information from landowners about where bears are. It really helped focus our survey efforts. They allowed continued access. This wasn't, we were out there a lot, so it was great that we had that kind of support and access to those private lands, and certainly very thankful for that support from the community. Okay, so I've been talking about these rub objects and our repeated sampling of those, but we also wanted to allow for some other types of situations in which there might be a hair collection opportunity, and we've called these opportunistic hair samples. So these come, for example, from a management or a bear that's trapped for management reasons. So, for example, if a Fish and Wildlife officer traps a bear that's been killing livestock, we want a hair sample from that bear. If a bear breaks into a grain bin and there's a hair collection opportunity, we want that. And again, if somebody's out fencing and they see a bear go through the fence, we allowed for those opportunistic hair samples, and they've been a really important second data source for us, and has been a nice way to involve some other folks within the project. So in terms of our hair collection then, at our rub objects, we went back every 3 weeks. So in 2013 and 2014, we made 8 visits to all of these rub objects. So we started at the end of May and we went through the first part of November. And so that was every 3 weeks we were visiting these. The first visit, we cleared all of the hair samples off of that rub object. And then the 7 subsequent visits, we sampled them. And we stored all of these hair samples in little coin envelopes, and we sent them at the end of the field season to a place called Wildlife Genetics International. This is a genetics lab in Nelson, BC. It's headed by Dr. David Petkow. And what we learned was we determined the species, so if it was a grizzly bear or a black bear, the sex of that bear, and then the individual identity of that particular bear. So in terms of what we have found, so between 2012 and 2014, on average, we detected about 118 grizzly bears per year. In total, from 2011 through 2014, we've identified 213 individual grizzly bears. So this is our genetic database that we now have for southwestern Alberta. So that's from cumulatively from those 4 years. We've identified 95 females, 118 males. And what these numbers represent are the number of bears that were using and detected in the study area at some point. So we're not suggesting that all 118 of these bears are here all at once, but rather over the course of that year, they came through, they used the area, and we detected them. The other thing that we've found that has been interesting is that about 40% of our hair samples were actually from black bears. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later because we now have some new information on the black bears as well. So in terms of what this looks like then and where we're actually detecting bears, so this is the 2013 detections. The dark blue are the males and the pink are the females. And so you can see we're detecting grizzly bears all across the study area. We're detecting them in the recovery zone, in the support zone, as well as a few detections outside of that to the east. And a similar picture in 2014. So again, the blue are the males, the pink are the females, and we're getting detections all across the study area, which is great. We want to see that because we're detecting bears in areas where we know that bears are. When we look at this in a little bit more detail in terms of where we're seeing bears, so like I say, we have this genetic database of 213 bears. Of those, there were 76 that we detected exclusively on public land. 79 were detected exclusively on private land, and 58 were detected on both public and private land at some point over these years of sampling. So the other thing that we've been working on now with the opportunistic hair sample, so as I said, this has allowed us to ask some other research questions that we're interested in. We wanted to see, well, how many bears were associated with these incidents that I was talking about in the beginning. So we have 86 hair samples that were associated with an incident site. So that doesn't mean we have 86 incidents, but because, for example, we might have a bear breaks into a grain bin and let's say we get 4 hair samples from that. Just that we had these 86 samples that were associated with some sort of incident. And when we look at the number of individuals there, that's 55 unique individuals, 24 females and 31 males. So this has been some other interesting information that we can have learned from those opportunistic hair samples that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Okay, so now what are we doing? Well, we've got all this information, and we're now putting together population and density estimates. And this is a challenging problem because I want to highlight again what I was talking about earlier, is that Southwest Alberta is this tiny part of this much larger international population. So the map that's on here right now comes from a wildlife monograph that Dr. Michael Proctor and numerous other folks published back in 2012. And what they did there was they took all of the genetic information that was available at that time and they looked to see where are bears interbreeding. So where are these genetic boundaries or the biological boundaries of these different grizzly bear populations. And we're in the area that's I've circled in the red there. We're in the southern Rocky subpopulation of grizzly bears. And if you look within that red line, you'll see there's a dashed yellow line. And that number for southwestern Alberta of 51, that's from that 2007 estimate. And then southeast BC is 178 and Montana 765. So at the time when they published this in 2012, this Rocky Mountain subpopulation of grizzly bears was about 994 bears. We know since then that population's grown. Montana's estimated that their population is growing at about 3% per year, and we're seeing similar growth rates here in southern Alberta. And so if you think about 3% a year out of a population of 1,000, we're well over 1,000 now, grizzly bears within this area. So biologically, this is our population. But we manage on state and provincial boundaries. And so Alberta has its own management plan, BC has its own management plan, Montana has its own management plan. And so we want these specific and state-specific and provincial-specific population estimates, even though biologically that maybe doesn't make the most sense. So that's what we've been working on, is we've been working to estimate the abundance of how many resident Alberta bears do we have. But we also recognize that there's a lot of other bears that are coming through the area and using the area, and that larger number of bears that are coming through represents the number of bears that have the potential to be involved in conflict. And so we want both of those metrics. We currently have a manuscript of this in review with the Journal of Wildlife Management. It's being peer reviewed right now, and as soon as that gets finalized, we will make that available to folks within the area. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and then talk about black bears for the next few slides. So as I said, About 40% of the hair samples that we collected were actually from black bears. And at the time, we weren't doing anything with those. We were putting them aside. So there's a particular genetic marker that will distinguish a grizzly bear hair from a black bear hair. And we didn't have the funding or resources to do anything with that. But we have since analyzed those black bear hair samples. And this work is being done by Annie Lucen. Some of you might know her. She worked for us on the Grizzly Bear Project for a few years, and she's just recently started her master's degree up at the University of Alberta. She started last fall. She's working with Dr. Mark Boyce, who's also my supervisor there. And this information is great, and it's very timely because the last population estimate for black bears it's over 20 years old. So we really don't have good information for black bears in southern Alberta or most places in Alberta. And so she's has two main goals with her project. The first is to basically just provide some simple numbers for black bear, because we really don't have any. So what's the abundance, what's the density, and then she's also going to be looking at some of the differences in habitat use between grizzly bears and black bears in southwest Alberta. So she has the genetic data back from black bears, and she just used the 2013 and 2014 data because those were our 2 full years of sampling. But in 2013, she identified 232 individual black bears, 129 males, 103 females, and very similar numbers for 2014, 222 black bears, 122 males, 100 females. So over these 2 years, we now have a genetic database of 347 unique black bears, and the 107 of these were detected both years. So this is a pretty cool data set that she's just starting to dig into and work with. And as a side note to Annie's project here, the black bear management plan in Alberta, they've recently updated it, and it's now available for public comment on the Alberta Environment and Parks website. So I believe it's posted until the end of the month for public comment. So if you're interested in that, if you just Google Black Bear Management Plan Alberta, it should come up there. And in terms of where we're detecting black bears, again, all across the study area, and some of this is interesting. So a lot of the literature on black bears has them more as a forest type species. The evolutionary history of grizzly bears and black bears is a little bit different. So grizzly bears are adapted to live on the prairies, and they evolved to take advantage of those prairie landscapes, whereas black bears didn't. They're more of a forested carnivore, and so it's interesting to me anyway that we're detecting black bears in basically all the same areas that we're detecting grizzly bears. And so this is some unique data, I think, that Annie will have to work with. And very similar for 2014, detected both in the public land portion as well as the private land portion. So she is currently working on that. And I think my last little plug here, I'm gonna put in a plug for the Waterton Biosphere Reserve Association, because we've got community meetings. Tomorrow is in Cowley at 7 p.m. and Thursday is in Cardston at 7 p.m. So I'll be giving a very similar, much shorter information than I did tonight there. Annie will be down there talking about black bears. Jeff Bechtel will be there talking about some of the carnivore mitigation work that the Waterton Biosphere Reserve is doing. And Terry Mack, who's a Fish and Wildlife Officer, will be there with some of the 2015 conflict data for the area. So it should be a good evening. So if you guys are interested in these types of issues, 7 p.m. in Cowley and on Wednesday, and 7 p.m. in Cardston on Thursday. And with that, there are a lot of groups that have contributed to this project over the last 4 years. We've had over 30 field technicians work on the project, collecting all of these hair samples. It's been a tremendous field effort. There's no way I could have done this without all of their help. Like I said, all of the landowners that have contributed and helped with the project, and lots of different funding agencies that have provided financial resources as well as in-kind support.